The food line at Market Ring snaked through a corridor of leaky pipes and flickering lights. Willie Bishop kept his eyes down, watching droplets of coolant form and fall from an overhead duct. 1, 2, 3. The steady rhythm matched his heartbeat, a metronome of patience in the overcrowded orbital station Kessin. He'd been standing in this same line 3 times a week for nearly a year. The faces changed: human, Centauri, Dravid, occasionally even a masked Felian. But the wait remained constant. 47 minutes from the back of the line to the front, where an automated dispenser would scan his ration card and deposit a week's worth of nutrient-dense protein cubes onto his tray. Willie shifted his weight and adjusted the translator module, hanging around his neck. The device was outdated, missing several dialect patches, but it was all he could afford since leaving his position as a station counselor. Now he picked up freelance work as a linguist, translating for refugee intake and helping with cross-cultural disputes. The work was irregular, but it kept his quarters paid and his stomach mostly full. A distant alarm sounded, followed by an announcement in Standard about air recycler maintenance. The crowd around Willie tensed momentarily, then relaxed when it became clear this was just routine. He observed the collective anxiety with professional detachment. Old habits died hard. "Human, are you single?" The small voice came from somewhere around his elbow. Willie looked down and found a violet-skinned child staring up at him with enormous silver eyes. A Lenari. He hadn't seen many of their kind since the evacuation of their home system 3 years ago. "Excuse me," Willie said, his voice rough from disuse. "Are you married?" The child, a girl, he guessed from the markings along her temples, spoke in halting Standard. "Do you have a mate?" Willie glanced around, wondering if this was some kind of joke. Pranking the sullen ex-counselor wouldn't be the first time station kids had found entertainment at his expense. But no one was watching. No one ever watched him anymore. "No," he answered simply. The child's face brightened. "Perfect! You have to marry my mother." Willie blinked. What?" "She's really kind," the girl continued, tugging at his coat sleeve with surprising strength. "She makes the best food with the station rations. Much better than those." She pointed at the protein cubes being dispensed ahead. "I'm sorry, but I don't think—" "Please." The girl's silver eyes widened further. "She's very sad and very alone. Just like you look." Willie felt something inside him shift, a rusty mechanism turning for the first time in years. Before he could form a response, the girl tugged his sleeve again. "I'm Leary," she said. "My mother is Rava. She's over there." Leary pointed to a corner of the market where a slender Lenari woman sat cross-legged on a thin mat, head bowed over something in her lap. Even from this distance, Willie could see the iridescent markings on her skin, more elaborate than her daughter's, shimmering faintly under the harsh station lights. "She doesn't talk," Leary added quietly. "Not since we left home. But she's still kind." Willie's training kicked in automatically. Trauma response, cultural dislocation, grief manifestation. He cataloged the clinical terms while studying the woman from afar. "The line is moving," he noted absently. "Will you meet her?" Leary persisted. "Just for a moment." Willie hesitated. His routine was sacred, the only stable thing in his life since everything fell apart. Meeting a traumatized Lenari refugee and her determinedly matchmaking daughter wasn't part of that routine. "I have work," he said, the lie sliding easily from his lips. Leary's face fell, the vibrant purple of her skin dimming slightly. "Oh!" That small sound of disappointment cut through Willie's careful detachment. He remembered counseling Lenari refugees when they first arrived at Kessin. Remembered how their emotions manifested physically in the luminescence of their skin. This child wasn't pranking him. She was desperate. "Maybe another time," he offered, immediately regretting the words. There wouldn't be another time. There couldn't be. But Leary's face brightened again, her skin glowing. Tomorrow? Same time? Before Willie could correct his mistake, it was his turn at the dispenser. He swiped his ration card, collected his protein cubes, and when he turned back, Leary was gone. He found himself looking over at the corner where the Lenari woman sat. She was still there, head still bowed. For a brief moment, Willie considered walking over, saying something. Then his survival instinct kicked in, and he turned away, heading back to his solitary quarters. That night, as he prepared one of his protein cubes for dinner, Willie found himself remembering the girl's words. She makes the best food with the station rations. He stared at the gray cube on his plate and wondered what that might be like. The next day, against his better judgment, Willie found himself in the food line again, a day early. He told himself it was because he'd miscalculated his rations, not because he was looking for a violet-skinned child with silver eyes. But when small fingers tugged at his sleeve, he wasn't surprised. "You came back!" Leary's voice carried a melody that the translation module couldn't quite filter out, a remnant of the Lenari's musical language. "I need more food," Willie said, not meeting her eyes. "Will you meet my mother today?" Leary asked, undeterred. Willie looked over at the corner. The Lenari woman, Rava, was there again, in the same position. "She doesn't talk," he said. "Not with words," Leary agreed. "But she communicates." Willie hesitated. "How?" Leary's silver eyes sparkled. "Come see." This time, when he collected his ration, Willie allowed himself to be led across the market floor. As they approached, he noticed the woman was bent over a small electronic tablet, her long, violet fingers moving in graceful patterns across its surface. "Mother," Leary said in what Willie assumed was Lenari, the word melodic and bright. "This is the human I told you about." Rava looked up, and Willie felt his breath catch. Her eyes were like her daughter's, but deeper, with flecks of blue around the irises. Her face was angular, with high cheekbones and a sharp jaw, softened by the gentle curve of her lips. The luminescent markings on her temples and neck pulsed faintly. She inclined her head in greeting, but made no sound. "She says hello," Leary translated unnecessarily. Willie nodded awkwardly. "Hello." Rava studied him for a moment, then returned her attention to the tablet. Her fingers danced across its surface, leaving trails of light that formed intricate patterns. "That's beautiful," Willie said, genuinely impressed. "What is it?" "Lenari calligraphy," Leary explained proudly. "Mother was a master calligrapher on our homeworld. She's writing our traditional songs, so we won't forget them." Willie knew from his counseling work that Lenari culture centered around vocal music. Their language itself was halfway between speech and song. "Can't she just record the songs?" he asked. Leary's expression darkened. "It's forbidden on the station. Lenari vocal frequencies interfere with some systems. They say..." She lowered her voice. "But really, I think they just don't like hearing us. We sound too different." Willie nodded. He'd heard about the regulations, officially, for technical limitations, unofficially, for cultural suppression. It wasn't the first time Kessen's administration had found ways to restrict refugee expressions. Rava made a quick gesture with her hand, and Leary stepped closer to her mother. "She wants to know why you're here," Leary translated after a whispered exchange. Willie shifted uncomfortably. "Your daughter was persistent." Rava's eyes narrowed slightly, and she made another gesture. "Mother says you didn't have to come if you didn't want to," Leary said. "She apologizes if I bothered you." "No, it's..." Willie fumbled for words. "It's fine. I just..." He looked at the tablet. "I've never seen Lenari calligraphy up close before." It wasn't exactly a lie. During his counseling work, he'd seen examples, but never the process of creation. The way Rava's fingers moved was almost hypnotic, trailing light across the screen that somehow captured the essence of sound. Rava hesitated, then turned the tablet toward him. The pattern pulsed gently, curves and lines flowing into each other in a visual representation of melody. "It's a lullaby," Leary explained. "One she used to sing to me before." The girl trailed off, and Willie saw the light in Rava's skin dim momentarily. Loss, he recognized, the visible manifestation of grief. "It's beautiful," he said again, because he didn't know what else to say. Rava nodded once, then returned to her work, clearly dismissing him. Willie stood awkwardly for a moment before backing away. "Thank you for showing me," he said. Leary followed him a few steps. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Willie hesitated. He should say no. He should return to his routine, his solitude, his careful neutrality. "Maybe," he said instead. That night, Willie dreamed of violet skin and silver eyes, of melodies written in light. He woke feeling unsettled, off balance in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be for years. He didn't return to the market the next day, or the day after. He took on 3 translation jobs in a row, working double shifts to keep himself busy, to prove to himself that his routine remained intact. But when he finally ran out of protein cubes 5 days later, he found himself back in the food line, scanning the market for a familiar violet figure. They weren't there. Neither Leary nor her mother occupied the corner where he'd seen them last. Willie told himself it was for the best, even as a strange disappointment settled in his chest. As he collected his ration and turned to leave, something caught his eye. A small piece of film paper tucked into the seam of his coat sleeve, exactly where Leary had tugged it days ago. He carefully extracted it and unfolded the delicate material. Inside was a pattern of luminescent calligraphy, simple enough that even he could recognize it as Lenari script. He couldn't read it, but somehow, he knew it was from Rava. The next day, Willie went to the market again, this time with purpose. He brought with him a small container of hot tea, purchased with credits he couldn't really spare. He found them in a different corner. Rava still bent over her tablet. Leary, sorting through a small collection of colored beads. The girl spotted him first, her face lighting up literally and figuratively. "You came back," she exclaimed. "Mother said you might, but I wasn't sure." Willie approached cautiously, the container of tea clutched in his hands. "I found the note," he said. Rava looked up, her expression unreadable. The markings on her skin pulsed once, brightly, before settling. "What did it say?" Willie asked Leary. The girl conferred briefly with her mother through gestures. "It was an invitation," she translated. "To visit again, if you wanted to." Willie nodded, then held out the container. "I brought tea." Rava's eyes widened slightly. She reached out, her long fingers brushing against his as she took the container. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through Willie's hand. She opened it carefully, inhaling the steam that escaped. Her eyes closed briefly, and the luminescence in her skin brightened. When she looked at Willie again, there was something like gratitude in her gaze. "Mother loves tea," Leary explained unnecessarily. "We had gardens of tea plants back home." Willie nodded, watching as Rava took a cautious sip. Her response was immediate. The markings on her skin flared with light, and her eyes closed in what could only be pleasure. "Is it good?" he asked, finding himself genuinely curious. Rava opened her eyes and looked directly at him. She made a small gesture with her free hand. "She says it's been a long time since she had real tea," Leary translated. "She says your manners are acceptable." Willie found himself smiling for the first time in what felt like years. "High praise." Leary grinned back. "For Mother, yes." Willie stayed for nearly an hour, watching Rava sip the tea and continue her calligraphy. Leary chattered happily about their day, about the beads she was collecting to make traditional Lenari friendship bracelets, about how the station children sometimes teased her for her color-changing skin. "They don't understand," she said with a child's simple acceptance. When they're sad, everyone can't see it. When we're sad, we can't hide it. Willie thought about his years of counseling, of humans and other species who spent enormous energy concealing their emotions. Maybe that's better, he suggested. Being honest about how you feel. Leary looked at him thoughtfully. You're sad a lot, she observed. I can tell even though your skin doesn't change. Willie felt suddenly exposed. I should go, he said, standing abruptly. I have work. Before he could leave, Rava reached out and touched his hand lightly. When he looked at her, she made a series of graceful gestures. Mother wants to know if you'll come again, Leary translated. She enjoyed the tea. Willie hesitated, then nodded once. I'll try. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Willie would visit the market every few days, sometimes bringing tea, sometimes small treats he could barely afford. He would sit with Rava and Leary for an hour or so, watching the calligraphy take form, listening to Leary's stories. Sometimes, when he returned to his quarters, he would find a small piece of film paper tucked into his sleeve or pocket, messages in Lenari script that he couldn't read but kept carefully preserved nonetheless. He began to learn the rudiments of Lenari gesture language, enough to understand simple communications without Leary's translation. Rava seemed to appreciate his efforts, her skin glowing more brightly when he correctly interpreted a gesture. One day, he brought a small translation module, specifically programmed for Lenari script. May I? He asked, indicating her tablet. Rava hesitated, then handed it to him. Willie scanned one of the calligraphic patterns with the module. A soft, synthesized voice emerged, attempting to reproduce the Lenari song. It was a poor approximation, mechanical and flat where Lenari vocals would be rich and vibrant. Rava's skin dimmed dramatically, and she reached out to take the tablet back. I'm sorry, Willie said quickly. I didn't mean to upset you. She shook her head and made a gesture he recognized now, understanding. It's not the same, Leary explained sadly. The machines can't capture the heart of our songs. Willie nodded, remembering what he knew of Lenari culture. The songs are living things, he said, recalling a phrase from his training. They change with each singer, each moment. Rava looked at him with surprise, her markings pulsing rapidly. She made a gesture he didn't recognize. Mother wants to know how you know that, Leary translated. I used to counsel refugees, Willie admitted. I learned about many cultures, including yours. Rava studied him for a long moment, then made another series of gestures. She wants to know why you stopped, Leary said. Willie felt his chest tighten. He hadn't talked about this with anyone. It was too much, he said finally. Too many people in pain. Too many stories I couldn't help with. Rava's expression softened, and she reached out, her fingers hovering just above his hand without touching. Understanding. Her gesture said, empathy. As the weeks passed, Willie found himself looking forward to these visits. His carefully constructed routine began to shift, reorganizing itself around these hours in the market corner. He started taking jobs that would leave those times free. Found himself thinking about what small gift he might bring next. One evening, as he was preparing to leave, Leary tugged at his sleeve as usual. Will you sponsor us? She asked abruptly. Willie froze. What? For permanent residency, Leary explained. We need a citizen sponsor, someone with a job and stable quarters. Willie looked at Rava, who seemed equally surprised by her daughter's boldness. I don't think I qualify, he said carefully. My work is freelance, and my quarters are barely big enough for me. Leary's face fell, her skin dimming. Oh! Rava made a sharp gesture, clearly scolding her daughter. I'm sorry, Leary said, though she didn't sound particularly repentant. Mother says I shouldn't have asked, But our temporary status expires in 3 months. And if we don't have a sponsor by then? She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Willie knew the protocols. Without sponsorship, refugees were relocated to industrial stations or planetary work camps, separated by species, age, and work capability. "I'll look into it," he heard himself saying. "I'll see what the requirements are." Leary's face brightened immediately, her skin glowing. "Really?" "I'm not promising anything," Willie cautioned. "Just information." Rava made another gesture, this one clearly directed at him. Gratitude. That night, Willie couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his small quarters, thinking about Rava and Leary, about the possibility of them being sent away. He thought about his life before them, the gray routine, the protein cubes eaten alone, the silence. The next day, he visited the station's administration center. The requirements for sponsorship were, as he'd feared, stringent. Stable employment for at least a year, quarters sufficient for all parties, financial responsibility for any sponsored refugees, and, most significantly, a formal relationship, family, employment, or partnership. "Partnership?" Willie asked the board clerk. "Mate bond, marriage, civil union," the clerk clarified without looking up from his screen. "Whatever term your species uses for a legal pair bonding." Willie left the center with a datapad full of regulations and forms, his mind whirling. The idea of proposing a fake marriage to Rava for sponsorship purposes seemed absurd. He barely knew her. She couldn't, or wouldn't, even speak to him. And yet, the thought of her and Leary being sent away, separated and assigned to some grim industrial function, was somehow worse. He didn't visit the market that day, or the next. He needed to think, to weigh options, to consider alternatives. On the third day, he found another piece of film paper in his coat pocket, though he couldn't remember Leary or Rava touching his clothes recently. The Lenari calligraphy was simpler this time, clearly meant for him to decipher. With the help of his translation module, he made out the message. "Are you well?" They were worried about him. The realization hit Willie with unexpected force. Someone was actually concerned for his well-being. He returned to the market that afternoon. Leary spotted him immediately, rushing over with obvious relief. "You're okay," she exclaimed. "Mother was worried when you didn't come." Willie glanced over at Rava, who remained seated, but watched him intently. "I'm fine," he said. "I was just busy." Leary led him to their corner, chattering about the events of the past few days. A new shipment of refugees had arrived. The air recyclers had malfunctioned again. She had made progress on her bead collection. When they reached Rava, Willie noticed she looked tired. The luminescence of her skin was dimmer, the markings less defined. "Are you okay?" he asked before he could stop himself. Rava made a dismissive gesture. "Fine." "She's not sleeping well," Leary confided. "The dreams are back." Willie remembered from his counseling work that Lenari often experienced intensely vivid dreams during times of stress. Sometimes, even shared dreams among family members. "I'm sorry," he said, feeling inadequate. Rava made another gesture, changing the subject. She pointed to his pocket, where the translation datapad was visible. "Oh," Willie said, suddenly nervous. "I went to the administration center. About sponsorship." Leary's eyes widened, and she translated rapidly for her mother. Rava's markings pulsed with obvious emotion. "What did they say?" Leary asked eagerly. Willie hesitated. "It's complicated. The requirements are strict." He explained about the stable employment, the quarters, the financial responsibility. He carefully avoided mentioning the relationship requirement. "But it's possible," Leary pressed. "Technically, yes," Willie admitted, "but it would be difficult." Rava studied him for a long moment. then made a series of gestures that were too complex for Willie to follow. "Mother says she understands if it's too much to ask," Leary translated. Though her expression made it clear, she disagreed with this sentiment. "She says we've already imposed on your kindness." "You haven't imposed," Willie said quickly. "I've enjoyed our conversations." Rava's skin brightened slightly at this, the markings around her eyes pulsing gently. "There's one more thing," Willie continued, steeling himself. "The sponsorship requires a formal relationship, family or partnership." Leary translated, and Rava's eyes widened. She made a quick, agitated gesture. "What kind of partnership?" Leary asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Marriage," Willie said bluntly, "or something equivalent." There was a moment of silence. Rava's skin had dimmed to an almost gray tone, her markings barely visible. "I told you he'd be perfect," Leary suddenly exclaimed to her mother and Lenari, the words musical enough that Willie could distinguish them, even without translation. Rava made a sharp gesture, silencing her daughter. She looked at Willie, her expression unreadable, then returned her attention to her tablet. "Mother needs time to think," Leary translated unnecessarily. "But I think it's a wonderful idea." Willie left the market feeling oddly deflated. He wasn't sure what response he had expected from Rava, but her sudden withdrawal stung more than he wanted to admit. That night, he found himself sorting through the collection of film paper messages he had accumulated. Using his translation module, he attempted to decipher them properly for the first time. Most were simple greetings or thanks, but one, from several weeks ago, caught his attention. "In silence, I hear you." Willie read it several times, trying to understand the meaning. Was it a reference to her own silence, or something more? The next day, he didn't go to the market. Instead, he visited the station's cultural center, a small, underfunded section of Kessin that few residents bothered with. There, he accessed the limited archives on Lenari culture, focusing specifically on their communication methods and bonding rituals. What he discovered surprised him. Traditional Lenari marriages were not primarily spoken agreements, but sung ones, complex vocal harmonies between partners that symbolized their compatibility and commitment. Without the ability to sing, Rava couldn't participate in a traditional ceremony, even if she wanted to. Willie dug deeper, looking for alternatives. He found references to something called a silent bonding, a rare practice used when one partner was physically unable to sing. It involved calligraphic exchanges, the writing of shared songs that would normally be vocalized. Armed with this knowledge, Willie returned to the market the following day. Leary greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, but Rava seemed subdued, her attention fixed firmly on her tablet. "I've been researching," Willie said after settling beside them, "about Lenari traditions." Rava looked up, curiosity evident in her expression. "I read about silent bondings," Willie continued, "for when singing isn't possible." Leary translated. Though from Rava's reaction, a sudden brightening of her skin, it was clear she understood even before her daughter spoke. "Mother says that's very old knowledge," Leary said. "From before we had modern medicine to fix vocal injuries." Willie nodded. "But it's still valid, right? Still recognized?" Rava made a series of thoughtful gestures. "Technically, yes," Leary translated. "But it's considered intimate, personal, not something done lightly." "I understand," Willie said. "I wasn't suggesting, I was just exploring options." Rava studied him for a long moment, then returned to her calligraphy. But this time, instead of turning the tablet away, she angled it so Willie could see. The pattern she was creating was different from her usual work, simpler, more direct, almost like a question. "What is she writing?" Willie asked Leary quietly. The girl watched for a moment, then smiled. "She's asking if you're serious about the sponsorship, about being willing to help us." Willie looked at Rava directly. "Yes," he said simply. I am. Rava's skin brightened dramatically, the markings along her temples and neck flaring with light. She added more to the calligraphic pattern, the movements of her fingers more confident now. She wants to know why, Leary translated, her own expression curious. Willie hesitated. It was a fair question, one he had been asking himself. Why was he willing to go to such lengths for two refugees he barely knew? The practical answer, that he had grown to care about their well-being, seemed insufficient. Because I don't want you to leave, he said finally. The honesty, surprising even himself. Because my life is better with you in it, Leary translated, her voice softer now. Rava's fingers stilled on the tablet, and for a moment, she simply looked at Willie, her silver blue eyes searching his face as if for confirmation of his sincerity. Then, slowly, she began to write again. The pattern that emerged was complex, yet harmonious, curves and lines flowing into each other with a rhythm that seemed almost familiar to Willie. It's a song of consideration, Leary explained, her voice filled with wonder. The beginning of a bonding negotiation. Willie felt a warmth spread through his chest. What do I do now? You should respond, Leary said. But, she looked uncertain. Humans don't write songs. Willie thought for a moment. Can I try? He asked, holding out his hand for the tablet. Rava hesitated, then passed it to him. The surface felt warm from her touch. Willie stared at the blank screen, trying to remember what he'd read about Lenari calligraphy, about how it captured not just sound, but feeling. Slowly, awkwardly, he began to trace lines with his finger. They didn't glow like Rava's did. Human skin lacked the luminescent properties of Lenari, but the tablet captured his movements nonetheless. He tried to remember music he had loved, tried to translate the feeling of it into visual form. When he finished, the result was crude compared to Rava's graceful patterns, but it had a certain earnestness to it. He passed the tablet back, suddenly self-conscious. Rava looked at his attempt. Her head tilted slightly. The markings on her skin pulsed in a pattern Willie couldn't interpret. Then, unexpectedly, her lips curved into a smile, the first he had seen from her. She made a gesture, acceptable. Mother says your calligraphy is terrible, Leary translated with a grin. But the sentiment is clear. Willie found himself smiling back. I'll practice. Over the next few weeks, a new routine developed. Willie would visit Rava and Leary daily now, often bringing small gifts, tea, treats. Once even a second-hand calligraphy stylus, he had traded 3 translation jobs to acquire. Each visit included an exchange of calligraphic patterns. Willie's growing marginally less terrible with practice. Rava's becoming more personal, more expressive. Through Leary, and increasingly through his own understanding of Lenari gesture language, Willie learned more about their lives before Kessin. Rava had indeed been a master calligrapher on their homeworld, specializing in the preservation of ancient songs. Her husband, Vaughn, had been a vocal composer, creating new works that bridged traditional Lenari music with modern influences. Father was famous, Leary said proudly. His songs were taught in schools. What happened to him? Willie asked carefully, aware this might be a sensitive topic. Leary's skin dimmed slightly. During the evacuation, she said quietly. The ships were overcrowded. There was a system failure, an explosive decompression. Father was in a section that was lost. Willie nodded, understanding now the source of Rava's trauma. Why she had stopped speaking. For Lenari, whose very language was half song, losing a beloved voice would be devastating. Choosing silence afterward seemed like both a mourning ritual and a psychological defense. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. Leary translated for her mother, who acknowledged with a gentle gesture, gratitude. As the deadline for sponsorship application approached, Willie began the formal process. He updated his employment status, consolidating his freelance work into a more official arrangement with the station's translation bureau. He applied for larger quarters, stretching his budget to the breaking point. He filled out countless forms, submitted to background checks, and met with skeptical administration officials. "You understand the commitment you're making?" one official asked, during a particularly grueling interview. "These refugees will be your legal responsibility. Their actions, their expenses, their behavior, all reflect on you." "I understand," Willie said firmly. "And the relationship?" the official pressed. "Cross-species bondings are rare and often complicated." Willie thought of Rava's calligraphy, of the increasingly personal patterns they had exchanged, of the warmth in her eyes when she looked at him now. "It's genuine," he said, surprising himself with how true it felt. The day before the final submission deadline, Willie visited the market with a special purpose. He had spent his last spare credits on a small Linari artifact, a bonding pendant, purchased from a cultural preservation dealer at exorbitant cost. It was a simple thing: a violet stone suspended on a cord, etched with calligraphic patterns that symbolized harmony. He found Rava and Leary in their usual corner, but something was different. Rava's skin was dimmer than he had ever seen it, her markings barely visible. Leary looked worried, her own luminescence fluctuating anxiously. "What's wrong?" Willie asked immediately. Leary glanced at her mother, who made a dismissive gesture. "Mother had the dream again last night," Leary explained reluctantly. "About father." Willie sat down beside them, concern overriding his original purpose. "Was it bad?" Leary nodded. "She woke up crying. She doesn't usually cry." Willie looked at Rava, who kept her eyes firmly on her tablet, though she wasn't writing anything. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Rava made a brief gesture, acknowledgement. "Maybe this isn't the right time," Willie said, reconsidering his plan. "I can come back tomorrow." Rava looked up at that, making a questioning gesture. "I brought something," Willie admitted, "but it can wait." Rava shook her head and made another gesture. "Show me." Hesitantly, Willie removed the small package from his pocket. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing the bonding pendant. "I found this," he said. "I thought, for the sponsorship application, it might help make things more official." Leary translated. Though from Rava's expression, it was clear she understood. Her eyes widened as she saw the pendant, and her hand moved to her throat in a gesture of surprise. "It's a traditional design," Willie continued, suddenly nervous. "If it's inappropriate, or if you'd rather not." He was interrupted by a sound, soft, barely audible, but distinctly musical. A single word, whispered in a voice rough from disuse. "Von." Willie froze. Beside him, Leary gasped, her skin flaring with light. Rava's eyes were fixed on the pendant, her expression a complex mixture of grief and something else, something Willie couldn't identify. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to upset you. I didn't know." Rava reached out and touched his hand, silencing him. She made a series of gestures, too rapid for Willie to follow. "Mother says it's Von's design," Leary translated, her voice shaking slightly. "The pattern on the pendant, it's from one of his compositions, his signature melody." Willie felt sick. Of all the pendants in the dealer's collection, he had chosen the one that would cause the most pain. "I had no idea," he said. "I'll take it back. We can find another way." Rava shook her head emphatically. She made another series of gestures, her hands trembling slightly. "She says it's a sign," Leary translated, her eyes wide. "She's been dreaming of Father telling her to move forward, to find a new song. She didn't understand until now." Rava reached out and took the pendant from Willie's hands. She studied it for a moment, her fingers tracing the calligraphic pattern. Then, to Willie's astonishment, she slipped the cord over her head, letting the pendant rest against her chest. Does that mean? Willie began, uncertain. Rava nodded once, definitively. She made a gesture he recognized now, acceptance. She's accepting your proposal, Leary confirmed, her face split in a wide grin. The bonding and the sponsorship. Willie felt a surge of emotion, relief, joy, and something deeper, something he wasn't quite ready to name. Thank you, he said simply. Rava's skin brightened, the markings along her temples and neck glowing with a warmth that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She reached out and took Willie's hand, her long, violet fingers twining with his human ones, in a gesture that needed no translation. The sponsorship application was approved 3 days later, with a notation about unusual circumstances, but no formal objections. The bonding certificate, registered under both station law and Linari tradition, was filed the same day. Moving Rava and Leary into his new quarters, still small, but with 2 sleeping alcoves and a shared living space, took less time than Willie had expected. They had few possessions beyond Rava's tablets and calligraphy tools, and Leary's collection of beads and small treasures. The first night together was awkward, all 3 of them navigating the unfamiliar intimacy of shared space. Willie insisted that Rava take the larger sleeping alcove, while he set up a temporary bed in the living area. Leary, adaptable as always, seemed delighted with her small alcove, immediately decorating it with her beads strung on lengths of wire. "It's just like having my own cabin on a starship," she declared happily. As the days passed, they established new routines. Willie continued his translation work, now with more regular hours at the bureau. Rava began selling her calligraphic art through a cultural exchange program, her patterns becoming sought after for their beauty even among non-Linari. Leary started attending the station's education center, proudly bringing home projects to show her mother and Willie. At night, after Leary was asleep, Willie and Rava would sit together in the living area, sharing tea and exchanging calligraphic messages. Willie's attempts were still crude, but Rava seemed to appreciate them nonetheless, sometimes reaching out to guide his hand, showing him how to create smoother, more musical lines. Slowly, hesitantly, Rava began to speak again, just single words at first, her voice soft and melodic even in standard. "Tea," she would say, accepting a cup from Willie. "Beautiful," when examining one of Leary's school projects. "Thank you," when Willie brought home special treats. The first time she spoke his name, Willie, the sound of it in her musical voice made his heart skip. He looked up from his work to find her watching him, a small smile on her lips. "Yes," he responded, trying to keep his voice steady. She shook her head slightly, still smiling. "Just Willie," she said, as if testing the feel of his name in her mouth. He smiled back. "Rava," he said in return, trying to give her name the melodic quality it deserved. Her skin brightened at his attempt, the markings along her temples pulsing gently. One evening, about 2 months after they had moved in together, Willie returned home to find Rava waiting for him, Leary conspicuously absent. "Where's Leary?" he asked, looking around the small quarters. "Friend's home," Rava said, her voice stronger now, though still soft. "School project." Willie nodded, removing his coat and translation module. "Did you have a good day?" Rava nodded, then gestured to the small table where she had set out tea and some kind of food Willie didn't recognize. "Made dinner," she said. "Traditional recipe." Willie looked at the food with surprise and delight. "You didn't have to do that." "Wanted to," Rava said simply. They sat together, sharing the meal. The food was unlike anything Willie had tasted before, complex flavors that somehow made the standard station protein base taste exotic and delicious. "This is amazing," he said honestly. Leary was right. Rava tilted her head questioningly. "When we first met," Willie explained, "Leary said you made the best food with station rations." She was right. Rava's skin brightened at the compliment, the markings on her face pulsing warmly. "Thank you," she said, the words coming more easily now. After dinner, as they sat with their tea, Rava reached out and took Willie's hand. Her touch was warm, her skin smooth against his. "Willie," she said softly, "need to say something." He looked at her, suddenly nervous. "What is it?" She hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words in standard. Finally, she reached for her tablet, calling up a calligraphic pattern she had created earlier. It was complex, yet harmonious, with a rhythm that reminded Willie of a heartbeat. "What does it mean?" he asked. "Gratitude," Rava said. "For sponsorship. For home. For—" She touched the pendant at her throat, the one bearing Vaughn's melody. "For understanding loss." Willie squeezed her hand gently. "You don't need to thank me." "Not just thanks," Rava continued, her voice gaining strength. "More—" She pointed to the pattern again. "New song. For us?" Willie felt a warmth spread through his chest. "For us," he repeated. Rava nodded, then leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. When he didn't, she pressed her lips to his in a careful, tentative kiss. Willie responded gently, mindful of how new this was for both of them. Her lips were softer than he had imagined, and slightly cooler than human temperature. The luminescent markings on her skin flared brightly at the contact, casting a violet glow that Willie could see even with his eyes closed. When they separated, Rava was smiling, her skin radiant with emotion. "Good?" she asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Very good," Willie assured her, smiling back. That night, for the first time, Willie didn't sleep in the living area. Instead, he shared Rava's sleeping alcove. The two of them curled together, her luminescence providing a gentle nightlight that somehow kept the dreams at bay for both of them. 3 months later, as they shared breakfast in their quarters, which now felt properly like home, Leary looked up from her food with a characteristic directness. "When will I get a sibling?" she asked innocently. "I'd like a brother, I think." Willie choked on his tea. Beside him, Rava's skin flared with embarrassment, the markings on her face practically glowing. "Leary," Rava said, her voice stronger now, though still musical. "Not appropriate question." Leary looked unrepentant. "Why not? You're bonded now. That's what bonded pairs do, isn't it? Make families?" Willie, recovering from his surprise, exchanged a glance with Rava. Her expression was flustered, but not closed off. They hadn't discussed children. Their relationship was still new, still developing. "Families come in many forms," Willie said carefully. "We're already a family, the three of us." Leary considered this, then nodded. "True, but a bigger family would be nice." Rava made a gesture of exasperation, but her skin was bright with amusement. "We'll discuss later," she told her daughter firmly. Leary grinned, clearly satisfied with this answer. "I'll start collecting beads for a brother's welcome bracelet," she declared, returning to her breakfast. Willie looked at Rava, who was shaking her head with fond exasperation. When she caught his eye, she smiled, a full, warm smile that made her entire face light up. She reached out and squeezed his hand gently. "Family," she said softly, the word half spoken, half sung in the Lenari way. "Our family." Willie squeezed back, feeling a completeness he had never expected to find on Kesson Station. "Our family," he agreed. And in the warm light of their small quarters, with Leary chattering about bead colors and Rava's hand in his, Willie felt the last of his careful detachment fall away, replaced by something brighter, something worth the risk of connection. In the background, one of Rava's calligraphic patterns glowed on the tablet propped against the wall, the visual representation of their new song, still being written, note by note, day by day.